It didn't crack. That's the thing I need you to understand. Right at the start, before I tell you anything else. Bark is supposed to crack. Supposed to snap dry and sharp, the way kindling snaps under a boot heel. This didn't crack. It tore. Slow and wet and warm, the way a seam tears open in something that's still living underneath the seam. I had the knife in my right hand, and near a foot of bark peeled back in my left, hanging there in the fog like a flap of skin. And my own breath was loud in my ears, fogging out pale in front of my face. And then, behind that breath, just under it, maybe half a second late, there was another one, matching me, learning the shape of me. I want to tell you I ran. I didn't run. Not yet. I stood there in that gap that isn't on any map, in fog so thick and so white it looked like milk poured slow into a black bowl. And I listened to something that had been sleeping inside a tree longer than my family's been on this mountain wake up and start copying the sound of my own lungs. Let me back up now. Let me tell you how an old man like me ended up standing in the dark with a knife in his hand and a tree coming undone in front of him. My name is Silas Vance. Folks up here call me Abe, on account of my granddaddy was Abraham Vance, and I favorin' so hard around the jaw that the name just moved on down to me, the way names do in these hollows, the way most everything does up here. Moves on down, generation to generation, whether you asked for it or not. I've walked these ridges the better part of 60 years. I know where the good springs are, and I know where the ground goes soft and swallows a boot in August. I know which hollows hold their frost till noon, and which ones never really warm at all, even in July. And I know, same as my daddy knew, same as his daddy knew, that there are certain gaps back in these mountains you don't go looking for. Not because they're hard to find, because they're easy to find, if you're the kind the mountain wants to find. My granddaddy used to talk about the ring trees. That's what he called them, low and careful, like the words cost him something to say. He said the old families, generations back, further back than anybody's grave marker could tell you, used to build their shelters inside a circle of certain trees. Not for shade, not for windbreak. He said those trees were markers, same as a fence is a marker. And what they marked wasn't a property line. It was a holding line. He never did explain what was being held. I was young, and I laughed at him some, the way young men laugh at old talk. And he just looked at me with that flat, tired patience old men get, and said, "You'll understand it or you won't, and either way the mountain don't care which." I understand it now. This past October, I took myself on a solo trip up past Widow's Ridge into a gap that doesn't carry a name on any survey map I've ever seen. My own granddaddy showed it to me once, back when I was a boy, and told me there was an old lean-to shelter back in there, three-sided, built up out of hand-split cedar and fieldstone, older than any structure the Forest Service ever put a stamp on. He told me it sat inside a ring of old growth, told me to remember the ring, told me never to step past it once the sun went down. I went in on a Thursday, middle of October, the leaves already turned and half fallen, that low gold light coming through bare branches the way it does that time of year, thin and cold and honest. The trail in was rough, more suggestion than path, grown over in spots, and I liked that. I liked that it took work to get there. Things that take work to find are usually still what they were. I found the shelter a little before dusk. 3 walls of hand-split cedar, silvered with age. Roof shingled in bark, gone soft and gray with decades of weather. Floor packed dirt, worn smooth by however many feet had stood there before mine. And around it, just like he said, a ring. Not a fence. Trees. Maybe a dozen of them, spaced even as fence posts, though nobody living had planted them that way. Cedar mostly, and one big old birch. And at the northeast corner, standing a little apart from the rest, a tree split clean down its trunk by some lightning strike so old the wound had gone gray and smooth at the edges. I want you to picture that split tree a moment. Not for reason yet. Just picture it. Standing a little outside the line the others made, like it had been pushed back, or like it had never quite belonged. I built my fire inside the ring, close by the shelter, the way you're supposed to. I gathered wood before dark, the way you're supposed to, working the deadfall at the edges of the clearing, breaking dry branches over my knee, stacking them close under the lean-to roof where the damp couldn't get at them. My hands were already stiff by then, the particular stiffness that comes on a man past 60 when the temperature starts dropping fast. And I remember thinking the wood felt thinner than it should, lighter, more of it punk and rot than good dry fuel. I told myself that was just the season. I told myself a lot of things that night that I had no business telling myself. I want you to know I did the right things at first. The fog started coming up out of the hollow below around supper time, and I watched it climb, slow, the way fog does at altitude, filling in the low ground first and then rising, quiet, patient, until it had swallowed the whole gap in a milk-white cold that pressed in against the firelight and didn't retreat an inch. It moved the way water moves, not the way weather moves. It didn't blow through, it poured. And once it had filled that gap up to the treetops, it just sat there, thick and unmoving, the whole rest of the night, like something had put a lid on the place. That fog had a particular kind of quiet to it. You know the quiet I mean, if you've ever camped high up in the fall. Not silence exactly, a hush, like the whole mountain was holding its breath along with you, waiting on something. I slept some, woke some. That's how it goes on the ground at my age. Around midnight I woke up proper, and the fire had gone down to coals, and I was cold clean through. The kind of cold that gets into the joints and just sits there. I fed the fire what I had left, and it caught weak, and I lay there watching it. And I did the arithmetic a man does in that situation. I had maybe 2 hours of wood, maybe less, and it was hours yet before any kind of light. Now I want to be honest with you here, because there's no sense telling this story if I dress up my own foolishness as something else. I knew about the ring. I'd been told about the ring my whole life. And I told myself, lying there in that cold, that a boundary a man's granddaddy warned him about 60 years ago is an awful thin thing to freeze to death over. That's how it happens, I think. That's how it's always happened, going back as far as my granddaddy's granddaddy. Not through ignorance, through arithmetic, through cold, patient, reasonable arithmetic. At 3 in the morning, when the fire's low and the wood's low, and the only tree close enough to matter is standing right there past the line, split open, curling loose bark thick as a man's hand, resin dark and dry-looking even through all that fog. I told myself it was just a tree. I told myself the ring was old-timer superstition, the kind that gets attached to any strange-looking stand of trees after enough winters. I told myself all the things a cold man tells himself. And I got up, and I stepped past the line of trees, out to that split trunk, and I started peeling bark. It came away easy at first, big gray curls of it, thick and dry on the outer face, same as any dead wood you'd strip for kindling. I want you to understand how ordinary it felt at first, how ordinary the fog felt, how ordinary my own tired hands felt, working at that bark by knife light, breath fogging, fingers going numb. Then I got down past the outer layer. The bark underneath didn't come away in a curl. It didn't crack, and it didn't splinter, and it didn't do any of the things wood does when a knife works under it. It gave. It gave the way a seam gives when you pull two edges of cloth apart, slow. I felt it tear along a line, soft, almost gentle. And the sound it made was not a wood sound at all. It was closer to breath let out through a nose. I kept the knife where it was. I didn't pull away. I want you to sit with that a moment, because I've turned it over 1,000 times since. Why I didn't pull away right then. I think some part of an old man's mind needs to finish a thing it started, even when every other part of him is already afraid. Underneath that torn layer, the wood wasn't wood anymore. It was warm. Warm the way a wrist is warm, or a throat. Smooth, too, smoother than any bark's got a right to be, and pale where the fog light caught it. Pale like something that's never once seen sun. I ran my thumb along it, and it wasn't rough like grain. It had a give to it, a softness, the kind of softness a man only ever feels in one place, and that place is under another person's skin. That's when my granddaddy's voice came back to me. Not the words so much as the tone of it, that flat, tired patience. You'll understand it or you won't. And either way, the mountain don't care which. I understood it right then, standing in that cold with a strip of living bark hanging off my knife. The whole clearing gone so quiet, even the fog seemed to be listening. Those ring trees weren't markers of a boundary. They were the boundary. Whatever the old families had found up in these gaps, generations and generations back, whatever had been walking these ridges before there were any Vances at all to name them, they hadn't killed it. They'd wrapped it, bound it up in bark and years and patient growing, layer on layer, the way a scar builds over a wound. And they'd planted it in rings, and they'd told their children never to step past the ring after dark. And their children had told their children, on down, until it got to an old fool standing in a fog with a knife in his hand, forgetting why the warning mattered. I had unraveled a seam that had held for longer than my family's whole memory of this mountain. I stepped back from the tree, slow. I want you to understand I moved slow, because everything in me at that moment wanted to be slow, wanted to be quiet. The way you go quiet and slow around anything that might not yet know it's awake. My own breath was ragged in my chest, and loud, the only loud thing in that whole white hush. And underneath it, half a beat behind, I heard it start. A breath that wasn't mine, matching the rhythm of mine. A little late at first, then a little closer, like something learning a song by listening to it twice. I walked back toward the shelter, back toward that low, dying fire, and my boots made their sound in the wet leaf litter, that soft, familiar crunch a man's walked 10,000 miles listening to and never once thought about. And from somewhere off past the ring, out where the fog had gone thick as wool, I heard boots, not following me, not chasing me, matching me. One step behind my own, and then, just as I noticed, no longer behind at all, beside. I did not look toward it. I want to tell you that was courage, but it wasn't. It was an old man's instinct, older than fear. The same instinct that tells you not to look a strange dog straight in the eye. I kept my eyes on my own fire, that small orange knot of light in all that white. And I walked to it, and I sat down close by it, and I fed it the last of my wood, and I did not look at the tree line again for the rest of that night. I heard the breathing near me for a long while. It never got louder. It never got angrier. It only got closer to right, the way a musician gets closer to right, the way a mimic bird gets closer to right, practicing and practicing in the dark until there's no difference left to hear. Somewhere before dawn it stopped, or I stopped hearing it, which may not be the same thing at all. I broke camp at first light, the fog thinning to gray, then to that pale gold morning color, ordinary as any morning I've ever walked out into. I didn't go back to that split tree. I didn't look at what was left hanging off it. I gathered my gear with hands that wouldn't quite stop shaking, and I walked out of that gap, and I have not gone back since, and I don't intend to. I tell you all this now, slow, the way my granddaddy told it to me, because that's how a thing like this is meant to be carried, not shouted, not dressed up, just passed on down, quiet, from an old man to whoever's listening, the way names move down these hollows, the way warnings do, whether you're ready for them or not. If you ever find yourself up in some gap that isn't on any map, inside a ring of old trees standing a little too even to be natural, and the fog comes up milk white, and the fire runs low, and the cold gets down into your joints, where reasoning starts to sound louder than warning. I want you to remember an old man telling you, slow and plain, that the bark isn't bark, that the ring isn't decoration, that whatever's sleeping in there has been sleeping a long, long time, and it is a patient thing, and it only ever needs one cold night and one tired man and one small, reasonable mistake. Stay inside the ring. Let the fire go out if it has to. Morning comes either way. I'm an old man now, settled low in the valley, and most nights I sleep fine. The wood stove keeps the house warm, and the dog sleeps at the foot of the bed. And there is nothing up here in the lowland dark that a man my age has any real cause to fear. But some nights, when the fog sits heavy on the ridge above my house, thick and white and patient as it was in that gap, I lie awake and listen to my own breathing, slow and even, in and out, the way it's gone in and out my whole life, without me ever once having to think about it. And I wait, just a moment, just to be sure, before I let myself drift down toward sleep, that nothing underneath it is learning to match me still. Close your eyes now if you haven't already. Let your breath go slow and even, the way mine does, here in the safety of the low valley, far from any gap that isn't on a map. There's nothing in this room copying you. There's nothing in the quiet learning your rhythm, waiting on its moment. There is only the dark and the mountain far off holding its old secrets the way it always has, and the long, patient night settling in around you, asking nothing more of you now than rest.